and welcome to Dear Katie, the podcast that amplifies courageous voices and real stories of resilience, healing, and hope after trauma. Inspired by the many letters Katie has received over the last 20 years, each week she interviews survivors, healers, and experts to honor their stories and explore the many paths to healing and hope. Before we begin, please know, many episodes of Dear Katie cover sensitive topics related to sexual violence, trauma, and recovery. Listen with care and take the space you need to take care of yourself. Your well-being is what matters most. Now, let's join Katie and today's guest for a conversation that matters.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Dear Katie podcast. It is such an honor to journey with each and every one of you. Every single episode, I feel like everything is unpeeling every honest layer. The coolest thing I think that you all should learn is this is so not produced. It's so not glamorous. You know, I can barely turn on my webcam, and most of our guests are so honored that they don't have to if they don't want to. And we're not about performance. We're not about a splash of the media. It's really about the truth of how hard this journey is and how covered up it is. And that is why I'm so delighted and honored to talk with someone I feel, even though we've never talked until today, I feel so much kindred spirit, and we're actually about the same age. And pretty much within like a year or two, we're the same age. So we grew up with a lot of the same back stories going on in the world. And yet we both reached a national platform for very different reasons, but under very similar situations of silencing and duress. I'll say that. And you all don't even know who you're about to hear from. So guess what? Today is a fabulous survivor named Rowena Chiu. And Rowena is the former assistant to Harvey Weinstein. In 1998, she was sexually assaulted by him at the Venice Film Festival and was coerced into signing a it's called an NDA, non-disclosure agreement. And we can talk about that if we want to. But it silences victims all the time. And it silenced Rowena, unfortunately, for 20 years. But in 2017, a New York Times journalist came to her home. And I don't know what doorstepped her husband means, but we're going to learn what that means. I feel like whoever it was, stepped over your husband, which is really interesting terminology. And over a decade, revealing information about the assault and the NDA. Rowena was featured in a subsequent New York Times investigation, but she insisted on remaining anonymous at that time. Finally, in 2019, she broke her own story on the NBC Today Show live in front of 3 million people. Rowena's story has been featured in books and in the movie She Said. She has given over 700 media interviews across 4 continents for international news outlets such as ABC, BBC, CBS, and NBC. She's testified at the House of Commons, the Massachusetts State House, and the State of the Union. She's writing her own memoir, yay, a novel, and a screenplay, in addition to working as a global Me Too activist, advocating for the rights of those who are oppressed or voiceless in churches, schools, universities, workplaces, and around the world. And my goodness, Rowena, this is going to be quite something. I cannot wait. So I think I would just start with saying thank you for being brave. And I don't know where that came from, but people ask me all that, how could you be the first? How could you be the only? And you were the first and the only as well, in a different set of circumstances. And I will start out saying, sometimes I don't know how to answer that question, but I also know that deep down for me, silence didn't feel like a truthful option to my internal self. It didn't feel like I could live with that. And I was quite worried deep down that my perpetrator would do it again and again. He was wealthy, privileged, not to the level of yours, but definitely in my little William and Mary college career, in my third weekend, I already knew he was, the Prince Charming of the campus. So I just was worried he would keep doing it over and over. And that I kind of looked at it, Rowena, and then I want to hear, I can't wait to talk, but I kind of stood on these top of brick steps at one of the oldest buildings on campus after like the first week of my rape. Rowena is my story. So I told my parents. They said it was my fault. I told the dean. She said, make up with him. You're going to ruin his life. Like, it was the first week of hell. but I tried, and so I was there by myself. But I just had talked to him because our friends set up a meeting. Like, you two should get back together. And he said, it's always tough for the virgins the first time around. You'll relax and enjoy yourself much better the next time. So I start with that, Rowena, because that was, I can still hear him. Like, I can hear his accent. You know how you can probably hear your perpetrator? You can hear his voice. I can still hear the way he said it, the way he looked at me when he said it. And I can remember standing up with a very, very sick stomach and walking out the front of these glass doors and thinking, this 30-minute walk is silence. My dorm. 2 buildings to my right was the police station. And in 1991, remember, you're 94, in 91, no one had ever talked about date rape. It was stranger rape. Right? No. Remember how old we are? No one had even, like, you're coming on that's why I'm so curious. Like, did my case even, like, make it to your ears in June 3rd, 91 on the cover of Time? Because it predated you just by a few years. You know what I mean? So anyway, what unfurled, as you know, my listeners and you might know, is like a whole journey of hundreds of interviews like you. And you know, I just took it on as someone's got to do this. And that's how I felt. But I'm, like, so grateful. So how did it feel to you? Like, what would you like to share? Because it's very personal, and I felt very alone. And it sounds like you had a husband, but that was 94, and this is 2017, and there's a lot of years in between, right?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I want to say I'm incredibly sorry to hear your horrific story. And I do think back about the sorts of things that people said to young women in the 1990s, and it was all perfectly acceptable to say these things. And I think you mentioned a number of people, both that were in your life personally and professionally, whether it's your parents or whether it's the dean of the college, who either didn't believe you or who attributed blame to you. And I think that what society has done to imprison and gaslight young women from the 90s and earlier, in terms of their own complicity in their own rape stories, is one of the most awful things that has happened, you know, in this history of how do we speak about sexual assault, how do we try sexual assault. So I like to think that the Me Too movement in 2017 was finally able to break the stranglehold that society had in terms of the language we used for young survivors and in terms of societal attitudes, frankly, to young women that were assaulted. And although we have a lot of work still to do, I was speaking in Berkeley last night, and I touched upon this subject of how I feel the glass is both half full and half empty at the same time. Without the Me Too movement, we wouldn't have normalized these sorts of conversations. It's not that sexual assault doesn't happen, but that one can't as publicly boast about it as before, and one can't diminish and minimize the victims in the way that we did before. That still happens, but it has to be no longer in broad daylight. I think people are aware that the pendulum swung and that what is acceptable to say in a public space is no longer acceptable now. Of course, that's only the first step in a long road that we have to tread in terms of changing law and changing policy to better protect sexual assault survivors. But I think that battle fought in terms of a public space and what is socially acceptable attitude towards survivorship, you know, is the first step in a very long journey to changing societal attitudes towards young women.
Yeah, but what do you think in particular happened in 2017 that helped change what you're talking about more? Like the ability to be public about one's story, and also to create at least an undercurrent of shame and embarrassment for those that would support the perpetrator just outright.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good question.
Yeah, the Stanford case, right? Yes. The swimmer, that was more recent. And
The Stanford case, I think, took place in 2018, and then she spoke
yeah,
out in 2020. So certainly within the same time frame. But
yeah.
to return to your question about what I think happened in the summer of 2017, really the question is how what circumstances caused the Me Too movement to reignite at that time,
Right.
and why do we think the New York Times were able to publish what they did about Harvey Weinstein, and then subsequent stories came out about other men of power? I think it was a very precipitous time in terms of gender relations in this country at that time. I think that many women, certainly on the more progressive coasts, were angry that Hillary Clinton had failed in her presidential run. I think they were angry that someone who freely admitted to grabbing pussies and kissing women without their consent was in the White House. So I think that there was a lot of anger from among progressive women, and that spearheaded this the permission that Jodie and Megan got from their editor to go ahead and publish the article, the fact that the article was well received and it really ignited a movement was sort of beyond their wildest expectations. But I think there was a broader context of this political and cultural context for the reason why the Me Too movement at that time was able to reignite.
So maybe, that Malcolm Gladwell tipping point idea, right? We had enough.
Right.
We had enough dialogue. We had enough classes on consent. We had mandatory requirements for college new student freshmen, and maybe there was enough of a bed of that important, like, accepted. This is a standard conversation, at least. And then it's maybe it was partly, where do we draw the line?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I always really think of 2017 as obviously there had been years leading up to this moment. And much like a tsunami, there was a gathering strength of waves underneath the surface of the water that took place for a long time before we got to the point where the Me Too movement kicked off in 2017. But I at once don't want to overemphasize or underemphasize the significance of it as a social justice movement. It has certainly achieved a great deal, but I think it was one moment in a long history of women speaking out about rights over themselves, over their bodies, over their right to make decisions. I mean, if you think about it, 100 years ago, women couldn't hold bank accounts. They couldn't own property. They couldn't determine who they were married off as chattel. They belonged to the men in their family. So really, as far as the history of women and female emancipation has gone, we've come a long way in the last century of women's rights. But sometimes it can be hard to take that perspective because, of course, in this present world, there's still a lot of work to be done. And certainly a lot of the activism groups that I work at are angry and fearful at the moment because it feels that women's rights to have autonomy over their own bodies has been greatly set back.
Yeah, it just went backwards. Well, maybe we could go back to a couple, like, amazing things about you, because I love you talking about the movement, but I also love talking about those personal choices that must have been so hard, like I had to make and you had to make.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think our listeners, Rowena, they're struggling with some of those same questions, whether it be, how can I face this entity? Maybe it's my uncle, maybe it's a relative, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a professor, and I need that internship, I need that recommendation. There's a million blockades. What gave you the courage, and what do you think helped you personally stand up?
Yeah,
that moment? And I guess maybe precursor to that is, there's no shame in silence, but you had a long NDA, like you couldn't say anything. And I don't even know when that started. So, I mean, your intro they gave us said when your assault happened, but how soon after were you silenced personally?
I started working for Harvey Weinstein in July 1998. I'd only been working for a few months when I traveled with him to the Venice Film Festival. So that would have been September 1998. We were on a 2-week trip to the Deauville Film Festival and the Venice Film Festival at that time. So Zelda Perkins and I, the other assistant who was working for Harvey at the time from the London office, we reported him to senior people within Miramax, and then we pretty short succession hired lawyers to work for us on seeing what kind of action we could bring against Harvey.
Did you feel supported by your colleague?
Not at all.
Oh gosh! You said we hired.
So Zelda and I worked together to hire lawyers to see what actions we could bring against Harvey. So in terms of support, I had support from Zelda, to be clear, but we were two young assistants, and she was 25 years old and I was 24 years old. So we had very little power. I'm sorry, I think your question was about, did I feel that there was support from senior colleagues within Miramax?
Yeah.
And I did not find any support within the organization, which would be a surprise to you. So really our story was a story of two young assistants who took on the system. And when you ask about dates, we ended up signing the non-disclosure agreement on October the 23rd, 1998. So once the wheels of the legal system were put into motion, it was in fact really swift. The non-disclosure agreement was negotiated over a 12-day period. So I think we started negotiations for that on the 11th of October, and we closed negotiations with signing the document on the 23rd of October. And so it was really fun. For a very complex document, it was negotiated very quickly.
Wow, that is quick. And it was you and Zelda on this, like, at the same time?
Zelda and I signed the document together in the same room. We were not permitted to keep a copy of it. And there were many other things about the document that were untoward. That document really represents a tremendous oppression upon the two of us as young assistants. We were silenced incredibly quickly. And of course, the document has no time limit. So it binds us to our legal requirements or what was placed over us ad infinitum. There is no, I think there's misunderstandings about it sometimes saying it's a document that lasted 20 years, which makes it sound like it expired after 20 years. But really, I broke it in 2019. You could say I broke it in 2017 when I agreed to be part of an investigation where I was anonymous, but I added my name to that in 2019. But I would be breaking protocol to be talking about it now. So I think there's a misunderstanding that once you've broken it, that's a one and for all, and you're done and you're released from the non-disclosure agreement. No. And of course, that's not true.
I'm so glad you're saying that. That's so important. I don't think a lot of people on our show, listeners, don't know that. And then they probably would. I'm asking what probably they're asking is like, what happens if you break it? What were you fearful of? I'm sure a million things, but top of mind, what was major in your mind when I'm like weighing this out?
So I think top of mind as a young woman, there are financial repercussions, there are legal repercussions, there are personal repercussions. So, what kept us quiet over those 20 years is it was very clear from our entanglements in 1998 that Harvey Weinstein had a lot more power and influence than we did. He had a lot more money at his disposal. He had top lawyers on speed dial. Like, this was a form of power that we couldn't even imagine. And so therefore, I think what kept us silent over 20 years is, well, if we ever spoke out about it, that Harvey would come down on us with like a ton of bricks, and that he would use his legal team to enforce all sorts of things on us, that he would drag us into a court of law, that he would claim defamation, that he would bankrupt us essentially. He would take every single penny that we had in terms of fighting a legal battle with someone who's much more powerful than us. And then on a personal level, we knew that he had the influence in society to destroy us, to make sure we never worked in the film industry again, but also to destroy those that we loved. As you know, within the NDA, there was a Schedule 5 that listed our friends and family that knew about my employment with Harvey Weinstein and who knew something of the assault. And the threat was very much always present, that Harvey and his legal team would come after our friends and family if we ever spoke out. So there was this huge tussle about them taking the names and addresses of our nearest and dearest. And I'm talking about people that weren't at all connected with our employment at Miramax. They could have been our parents, our sister, my boyfriend at the time, my friends at university. This was really a case of taking personal connections and using the fear of those personal connections themselves facing damage and retribution and retaliation that kept us silent. If we would not be silent for ourselves, we would be silent on behalf of the people in our lives that we loved.
Oh my gosh, Rowena, it feels like a huge weight has just dropped over me. It's overwhelming. It's oppression at its most evil because it's covert, right? It's using that agreement, which I guess what you had a lawyer when you signed it, right? But I don't know. I'll just give you my own understanding is when I signed an agreement with HBO to make a movie about my story, I didn't understand what I was agreeing to. And the lawyer said, oh, just sign this. And I thought I was going to have all kinds of control over the likeness, the images, the storyline. And then I look at what they produce. I even begged Rowena, just my version of like, I know our stories are so different, but I was 18, right? So a lawyer swept in and said, oh, I'll help you. And they didn't really do much, but they were happy to take, so HBO said, I'll give you enough to cover your net because my parents weren't supporting me. So I needed tuition money. So HBO offered me a next year's tuition, basically. I was like, oh my God, I get to stay in school for 1 year if I sign this thing. And then the lawyer took like 20% and I didn't even know. And I thought, like, I asked my lawyer, I said, don't I get to like help make the movie? And can I meet the actress portraying me? And they said, no, we're afraid she'd have to be you. I'm like, what do you mean you're afraid she'd have to be me? I'm like, she is supposed to be me. So, don't you feel so manipulated when you're so young? But I'm curious, like your version, I don't even know who like came up with this like silencing mechanism. Did they try and buy you out, say, we'll pay for 3 years of your salary? Or like, how did they get you even to sign the thing at the start? Were they threatening you?
Yes. So it was a combination of all those things. Yes, there was a financial settlement with the agreement where originally they were going to offer us, I believe, 18 months of each of our salaries. And since we were incredibly lowly assistants, what we were being paid was barely anything. So at that time in 1998, I think I was making 18,000 a year, which is which would not have been enough to afford rent or to afford to feed myself. So I was basically constantly on the poverty line, as you are when you work in the arts. Mm-hmm. And so I think their original offer was something like 25,000 because that would have represented 18 months of salary. I think I'm grateful for the fact that Zelda Perkins has the presence of mind to say, no, we're going to ask for a substantial sum of money.
Oh, wow.
And so in the end, the settlement agreement financially was to split $250,000 each. So we received 125,000 each. We had made a moral commitment, I guess you could say, a moral commitment to give away that money. And I did in the end up giving away that money, partly because I was very young and I was very idealistic. And I was of the view that I could not allow Harvey Weinstein to own even a brick of a house that I might buy in the future. Or if I bought an item of clothing that my mother loved, I felt that that would be bought and paid for by my blood. And so I think very much I didn't want to accept money in the first place. Zelda had the presence of mind to say, if we're going to accept money at all, it has to be a substantial sum of money to signal to people who are digging into this case in the future that something serious happened here. We can't accept an insulting sum of money because it's like saying, oh, Harvey's hand brushed past her bottom and she completely overreacted. So the sum of money to be settled on what happened had to be commensurate to the severity of the incident. And then whatever we wanted to do with that money, like give it away, we could decide that later. And I think it was really prescient of her to say that at the age of 25. She had a foresight about what would happen with this story. I think I always felt that Harvey was so powerful that he would bury this story for perpetuity, whereas Zelda always felt this story will come back and bite us in the bottom. And that she was always convinced that one day the story would rear its head. And she was right. She was right about that. And so she really had the presence of mind to be able to predict that situation.
Yeah, I understand. It's very helpful, and I appreciate you explaining how it felt at that time, and also how you two kind of worked together as a team, even though you had barely known each other, but for a few months, right? Right.
Yeah, and I think it is fair to say that we were two young women, and we had different motivations for wanting to, to go after Harvey for we had different motivations about that. But I think certainly it was to our strength that despite the fact we had different motivations, it certainly helped that we had each other, because that provided moral support and courage at a time when really the world was acting against us. And so it was very difficult to stand up and to speak on that basis when you know that the world is much more powerful than you, and it's going to do everything it can to shut you down. So the fact we had each other was powerful back then. I do think it was very powerful in terms of the New York Times and their subsequent investigative report almost 20 years later, because for them, the idea of having two young witnesses who could corroborate each other's story, as I'm sure you know, is a very rare thing in the world of survivorship. As you know, it is usually a he said, she said situation. Unfortunately, most sexual assaults take place in a private space where there often are no other witnesses. So that makes it very problematic, because it's often, the woman and her credibility and her voice being suppressed really by the forces that are in society that really do prevent women from speaking out about sexual assault.
Yeah. Maybe we could talk about another part of your journey too, Rowena. I mean, I'm open to talking about whatever you want to talk about, but I'm just listening and thinking and going back in time, because it's so fun to really go kind of imagine the parallel times of what's going on. And, so you are silenced, and then you said you had a boyfriend at the 25-year-old self, and then we know there's a husband around 2007, it seems. But is the boyfriend now the husband, or was there other relationships in between? And just on the personal front, if you're willing to share, because that's a lot of trauma, all of it.
So no, it did not happen that way. I moved to Hong Kong, and I attempted suicide twice during my time of living in Hong Kong. I think it was incredibly difficult for my long-term boyfriend. We'd been together since I was 19, and at this point I was now 26, at the point where I tried to commit suicide. So we'd been in each other's lives for 7 years. I think that one thing that often people don't talk about is this idea of secondary survivorship. How does a sexual assault impact the partner of the person who is the primary survivor? And I think there's a lot of suffering that often doesn't really see the light of day. The focus is on the survivor, and quite rightly, because the survivor experiences the most primary trauma from that event, and also that survivor voices have been very much suppressed until very recently. So we're still in a stage as a society where we look upon trauma and we think only of trauma on the part of the victim and or the survivor. But I always like to say that a survivor is often many things. If it's a female survivor, they might be a mother, they might be a girlfriend, they might be a wife, they might be a colleague. And I think that the idea that trauma has tentacles that spread into every area of your life is something that's understood, I think, by every survivor. And so I think that's a really excellent, what you asked me is a really excellent question, because even though I'd been in a relationship for a long time at that point, and I considered it to be a very stable relationship moving towards marriage, it disintegrated in the face of the trauma that I experienced. And I think that is often something that is not talked about enough.
I'm glad you shared that. Oh my gosh, thank you for your vulnerability, Rowena. That I think, and I would even go to the children of trauma, victims, their children, and what, when we relive it, when we get to that same age, or all the trigger, it's well said. And I would just expand that it is all encompassing the layers of the impact. So oh my gosh, I'm devastated to hear about how dark things must have been. If you're willing to talk about that, like, how did you find strength and courage from that place where you were?
I think it wasn't at all easy. I think that when one hits a point where you've actively attempted suicide, you often are there because you feel there is no other exit. That life as you know it is so unbearably painful that you don't want to keep going with this particular life, but that there's no way out. Certainly I felt, I had tried therapists, I had tried medication, I had tried moving countries, I had tried changing jobs, I had tried changing industries, and none of that really got to the heart of the trauma that I sat on and that was ever present in my life. And so I think that is a point at which, an individual chooses the ultimate way out, which is death. And I think that is a place that you come to when, as you say, things get very, very dark. And so when I failed to kill myself, despite attempting it twice, I decided I was going to have to take a different approach. I thought, well, I have to do something drastic. And so in the end, I left my boyfriend at the time in Hong Kong. I moved back to the UK, which is where I grew up. I left the film industry entirely. I really left behind everybody I knew, all my friends at the time, and I started from scratch. And I remember, I briefly mentioned about seeing 8 different therapists because I felt no therapist could actually reach the depths of despair I'd sunk to. And I remember one thing a therapist saying that really got through. She said, make a list of things that you used to enjoy before you became this person. You don't enjoy them now, and I know that. But make a list of what they are. They might be small, they might be big. So something as an example of a small thing is buying yourself what used to be your favorite bar of chocolate before the rape. A big thing would be moving back to the UK, say, leaving Hong Kong, moving back to the UK. That's a big life decision, right? So make a list of big things and small things. It doesn't matter what they are. Even better if you can just jumble them all together. And these are things that you used to want to do. You had dreams and aspirations and just even preferences, like a favorite bar of chocolate. Put that all down on a piece of paper. And then she said, I want you to randomly select one. Once a week, whatever time you think works for you. If it's a simple thing like buying your favorite bar of chocolate, go out and do that for yourself. Like having a bubble bath, go out and do that for yourself. If it's a big thing like I'm going to buy a house in this part of the country or I'm going to move country, do
Big
something
yeah.
that contributes to that. Like I had always dreamed of getting a house in the country. I never did, but it's a dream and an aspiration. So she gave me the example of get a real estate brochure that illustrates the kind of house you one day might want to buy, because what she's building is positive steps towards concrete things that you do to lift yourself out of the deepest depression you've ever experienced in your life. And at the time, those things won't feel great. In fact, they'll feel awful, because I think that you get to a level of self-hatred that's so deep, you don't even want to go out and buy yourself a favorite bar of chocolate, because you know that's not going to fix things. You know that you're not going to feel any happier. But slowly, if you do enough of these things, and over time, you are basically treating yourself as though you are valuable, whether it's a small thing or a big thing. Each time you do something like that, you're saying to yourself, I'm of value. I'm worth enough to stay in this world. And I think gradually things got better, but over years, I'm talking about years, people are constantly like, well, when is it going to feel better for me? Will I feel better next month? Will I feel better in 6 months' time? Will I feel better in a year? They never think of How will I feel in a decade? What will I feel 2 decades from now? So I think there's two things. One, it takes impossibly longer than you could ever imagine when you're only 24 years old. When, in my case, I was 26 and attempting suicide. I'm not going to feel better by the time I'm 27. I didn't even feel better by the time I was 30. So it takes much more time than one could even imagine. And secondly, it is not a linear journey, as I'm sure you know, and all of your listeners know. It's not a linear journey. So when you say things like, I thought by this time I'd be feeling better. It's been a whole year since, insert as appropriate. It's been a whole year since I was raped. It's been a whole year since I attempted suicide. It's been a whole year since I lost a child. There is no time that you can put on it that you can look back and say, oh, I made progress. It's been a whole year since. Those things aren't valid anymore in this world of deep depression, of suicide attempts, of trauma. Because what happens is life becomes incredibly messy. There isn't a linear progression where you put one foot in front of the other. There are moments when you can see more hope, but there are moments when the darkness pulls you back in. And that's how it is. And I think if we as a society let go of this expectation we place upon women in general, but certainly upon sexual assault survivors, things that are said to women that are meant to sort of buck them up, but actually have the opposite effect. Things like, aren't you over that yet? It was a really long time ago. It's already been a year. Don't you think you should put this behind you? I'm sure you've experienced all of these lines, and some of them are said by really well-meaning people in your life. People who want to see you get better. They're not trying to drag you down. They're just trying to buck you up a bit and get you on and move you on. You know, the world is very obsessed with progress. And so there's this whole language around the progress a sexual assault survivor might make. And I'm here to say my lived experience, there is no such thing as linear progress. There's no such thing as putting one foot in front of the other. There's things that you can do to try and lift yourself out of that huge depression by treating yourself better. And that's all part of a very messy spiral that you'll go on as you live with this trauma, really, for the rest of your life.
Yeah, Rowena, my gosh, that was so beautifully said. That should have been your book right there. I'm honored. All of it was perfect. And it made me think about some of the other things that are out there right now, or what's trending in this healing journey, Rowena. And I interview, just for your information, our listeners might hear, I've interviewed a couple of the therapists who are doing this EMDR. And it's being touted right now, or at least the therapists say it works so quickly. You'll be so much better. Some do these 6-hour marathons. And I'm just curious, I worry that might be setting people up for a quick surgery. We'll extract the demons from you and you will no longer feel this. And, I'm not someone who could speak to it, but I hear what you're saying and I like kind of sitting in it. And I also think one thing you said is, or I would like to think about is, dark places are dark places, but they make the bright places even brighter. So I'm not saying everyone needs to develop some sort of personality pendulum, but I do think it's worthy not saying that all of the bad things, there can be goodness. Sometimes when I sit in some of my hardest, darkest moments of disbelief, or things I'll never be able to fix, I think I can feel stronger just because I can accept, how good is it when I can say, nope, that's not something. It's empowering to say, I don't need to work on that. I don't need to fix that. There's a power in saying, that's how it is. It's either going to get recycled, trashed, or set aside or honored as a scar. It's got a place in the world as something that is in the past. But, if it's not tossed out completely to the recycling bin, then, maybe, I don't know. That's kind of my musing on what you just said, is maybe helping our listeners and the survivors listening, thinking about those aspects of, that's how I deal with it too, Rowena. I love your, which bar of chocolate, and I I was going to say like the house hunting idea. I love it. I would have been like, let's hire the real estate agent. Let's go for it. Let's stop at every like pub in town. Let's have a great old time.
I think it's significant, even if some of these things are impractical and they're just dreams and aspirations. I think actually this idea that you're signaling to yourself that you are somebody of value, when the world really treated you in a way that has diminished any sense of value you have in yourself. You know, my heart broke when I heard your story of the parents who said it was your fault, or the dean who said there's nothing that can be done, and even your own perpetrator who said it hurts the first time, but it will get better after. I mean, how sickening is that line? But all of those lines are a way of signaling to you that you are not worth anything, that your needs are worth less than his reputation, or the reputation of the college, or the reputation of the family that you came from, if your parents weren't supportive of you. And I'm very sorry of that. But
were your parents? But that's a good question.
No, they did not know.
I see you were the same boat. They weren't supportive either, I'm sure. I mean,
it wasn't that they weren't supportive, but that I felt it would be horrifying for them to know. They had always been immigrants in the country of their residence, and
in London?
In the UK. So they are Chinese immigrants in the UK, and some of those cultural myths about Chinese culture, it's true. You know, Asians are known to be deferential, to not stand up for themselves, and I think it was true in the way that they raised me. They raised me as though we were guests in the country, as though we could get thrown out at any point. I think it was certainly true that this immigrant fear that your needs are not worth the person next to you, and that you live in a very precarious situation, and that you could lose your money, your house, your children, your status, your employment record, your immigration rights could be taken away from you at a moment's notice. And I think that many people of color who live in Western countries, continue to carry that with them, whether it's the fear of the Holocaust, the fear of Japanese internment camps, the fear of the Chinese Exclusion Act. These things are too much in recent history for people of color in these communities in white-dominated communities, I should say, to be able to lay that aside and to feel confident in the society in which they live and work.
I know. I don't think, because we just met each other, I always try to explain, Rowena, all these years, 34 years later, I just try to say in 1990, my assault happened in September of 90. And I always say, thank goodness there had to be a first. And my case was a single variable that the United States of America was ready for, because I am white, heterosexual, Christian, virgin, straight A student, second oldest college in the country, missed one on the SAT. You know what I mean? Like missed one on the SAT. The bad thing I did, thing, it was the only, I had one question. The country only had to say, can this otherwise perfect girl say no after this very rich boy pays for dinner and she invites him back to her room? Like, it was just one thing. Like, one date, I never went out with him before. One date, one night, one payment for dinner, and that was it.
But can that even go down on the record as a mistake on your part? Because
it was.
The whole point is that it doesn't matter what we are wearing or what we say. Yeah, but it doesn't give anybody a right to rape us.
You would love it. You should look at the Time magazine issue in 91. It polled the United States attitude in that year of those questions. If she's wearing this, does she deserve to be raped? And my question, all of them. And it was, if he pays for dinner, should he expect yes? It was like 69% of the country said yes. But look how great we are doing, Rowena. Look at how these dark places took us. Well, okay, let's talk about, you are so incredible. I'm like, the more of your story, I can't wait for the book and the movie and the Rowena story. But and that sounds daunting too. I hope, as you think about writing your own narrative, and I'm sure you thought about it, but I don't know, you'll probably have more people trying to mold it into what they want to think will sell, and there's all that crap. But at least you and I get to talk, and nobody's going to tell us what to say.
That's true. This is unedited.
Well,
our Survivor Voice is a platform via your podcast. And I want to say at this juncture, I really appreciate the opportunity to come and tell my story on these platforms, like podcasts, because I agree with you. I think they're not gatekept. I think that we have an opportunity, survivor to survivor, to engage in a dialogue that I hope will lift your listeners, and that they can find something in both our stories that they can resonate with and connect with.
Yeah, I love it. And to me, like, here's another thing I think, Rowena, because I mean, you just mentioned you were at Berkeley last night, and hopefully you had a packed auditorium of people, because you know what I also think about. I mean, the media is obviously really important, and thank God they broke your story and helped you. I hope you felt helped and supported. We haven't talked about that. I can only tell you one of my first memories of the Philly Inquirer was when they belly crawled their photographer down the middle aisle and captured me crying at the most poignant, powerful, like awful, like on purpose. I was like, oh my God. That's why I hate I'm like, I've been on I don't want anyone to take my picture ever again. Like, I don't need any more photos. But anyway, back to like you and I talking, I think what's really nice is we can just think together, and we can talk about what this journey feels like in a very honest way. And I guess so another thing you said that I wanted to think about was, I love how that, that process, that therapist helped, but what becomes sustainable too, like you, I don't believe there's it's like, when people say get over it, my response to that one, Rowena, is I'll say, when your best friend died, grandma died, mom died, like somebody really, like, when are you going to get over them dying? Like, when are you going to stop thinking about them anymore and like mourning their loss? Like, you're not over big things that happen in your life. Yeah, so stop telling me to get over stuff. I always like to say you fit it in. And when you're gloriously successful at like figuring out what to do with it, you say, okay, like, let's go. I'm going to do this. I'm going to give me something. The last time I interviewed somebody, or I was interviewed, Rowena, I said, give me something harder to do. Give me something nobody else has ever done. I want to do what nobody's done. Give me the hardest thing that nobody else can do. Like, I'll be the first at everything that's hard. Like, the more difficult it is, I think if someone's got to try it, I'm willing. Sign me up.
Yeah. Yes. So you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself because
I love it. That makes me really happy. The harder it is, the better.
So you're not afraid to take on a challenge.
No, but that's why, like, I'm excited because everybody's different, and you're wired and you're very clear, and it's so like interesting to think how your personality has led you through all of these things, and when was your like point and how you like pulled yourself up. I mean, the first boyfriend of so long, that's a really important relationship. I won't even ask you to talk about, if you ever talk to that person now, because are you married now? You have a husband?
Yes.
Are you a partner?
Yes, I've been married since 2007. So let's quickly do the math on that. That's like 17 years.
Okay.
I think I always get surprised whenever I do the math on that. And we have 4 kids. They are 4 kids. They're 15, 13, 10, and 7.
Okay. Oh my God.
So it is.
Are you done?
Really, yes.
Okay.
We're very much done. We all have 3 pets. So we started collecting pets once we stopped having children. So we now have 3 pets.
How many do you connect to, like, birds and snakes and cats and dogs?
So we have 2 bunnies and a puppy. Yeah, the puppy's very adorable. So I think we're done with kids because we've now started collecting furry kids.
Okay, gotcha. Well, that's sometimes it's the more the merrier, I guess.
Yeah, but I do want to take you back to that point about my first long-term relationship, because I think one thing, another framing for the way that people think about sexual assault is in some ways it's too narrow. They think about the loss of body autonomy and the trauma of having something being forced upon you, which, not to say, of course, you and I have both been victims in this area, not to say that sexual assault itself is not incredibly traumatic. To have someone bigger than you physically, but also bigger than you in status, imposing their will upon you is a terrifying thing to have to endure. But there are also enormous secondary repercussions. The loss of trust and innocence, the feeling of being afraid in whatever place in society you end up going in, the self-doubt, the crippling self-doubt that can sometimes go on for years, the loss of physical health because of what survivors and victims have to go through in the years that follow to process trauma, and the loss of significant relationships, because as you're going through this trauma, you end up knuckling down and maybe being really unpleasant to live with. And a lot of that is not your fault, but it is often perceived both by the individual and society around you as your fault. If you become an unpleasant person to live with because you are suicidal, it's your fault. But actually, it's not your fault. It's a precipitating event that caused it. So let me go back to my original relationship of 7 years. We didn't then, just in the same way as I didn't speak to Zelda because we were contracted not to speak to one another for 20 years, I also didn't speak to this individual again for 20 years.
Oh.
And we had completely lost touch, of course, because my suicide attempts were in the year 2000. And even in the year 2000, the internet was still in its infancy. And although you had things like Friends Reunited, you didn't have the ubiquity of social media now: Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, email addresses, mobile phones, and all the rest of that stuff. There are so many different ways to connect with a person, with the way that the social media and social networks work, that you can't really ever lose one another. In 2000, it was actually relatively easy to lose track of people. So we did not communicate for another 20 years until the BBC, who are making a documentary about the Weinstein story, actually took it upon themselves to look through, I should say more accurately, a production company that is licensed to make something in partnership with the BBC, actually took it upon themselves to look through my Schedule 5 and to try and track down all of my friends and family that were listed on the contract. And that's how they unearthed my first boyfriend. I don't know whether that was a good thing to do or not a good thing to do, but I think, we had some very harrowing conversations, and I'm not in touch with him now. I had a couple of very harrowing conversations back in 2023, so a year or two ago. And I just, I share that part of my story to say that I think that something like sexual assault really can complicate your personal relationships to a huge extent. I've now spoken to dozens, maybe even hundreds of survivors who have experienced divorce and separation as a result of a sexual assault occurring. And I want to say to people out there who are experiencing a similar situation, it's not your fault. You were a victim of circumstances that were well beyond your control when someone forced themselves upon you. And so if you subsequently can't make your personal relationships, your marriage, your long-term marriage work out, there are extenuating circumstances that you cannot blame yourself for, because I think women tend to really blame themselves. And when a relationship that meant a lot to us as individuals falls apart, I think it's even easier to say it was my fault, I behaved badly, and not to extend or not to connect that really with extenuating circumstances beyond yourself.
I hope that can be portrayed better, Rowena. I think what you just said is paramount, that it's like another layer of blame we can go through as victims.
Yes.
And it could extend to, all the people around us. Just either they complain that, my gosh, I don't even know what to say to you. Like, I don't even know what I'm allowed to say to you that you might not feel triggered to, or I can't read your mind. Like, all the lines, right? I can't read your mind. I wasn't in your situation. I wasn't there. I mean, you can imagine the long list of comments that probably every survivor has heard from people who used to think that they were there or close to them. And so I agree that who knows what will happen, I guess, with that aspect. I'm thinking of, in the few minutes we have left, this is like fabulous conversation, but I guess, I don't want to ask you anything that feels too overwhelming, because you're taking on some of the largest projects right now. in addition to managing 4 children, teenagers and younger, now you're also doing the book and the movie. Does it feel, and you're doing this podcast even and many other interviews, probably, pretty consistently now, if you've done 600 in about 5 years or I guess maybe over the course of 8 years, right? Like hundreds of interviews over 8 years is a lot of interviews.
It is. I think we're now up to 1,000. I track it.
Oh, you do?
but it ebbs and flows.
Yeah.
I know it's 1,000 because it's on a spreadsheet, but it ebbs and flows. In fact, I can tell you, just for your own entertainment value, what number you are. You are somewhere in the 900s. So just give me a minute to look it up.
913. Let's hope that's my lucky number.
Is that your lucky number?
Oh, anything to 13 or 23. My sister's birthday.
You're like Taylor Swift. You like the number 13.
Well, I was born on the 13th, and my sister was born on the 23rd. So you
are number 985.
Okay, well, I'll take it. 85 sounds fine.
So you see, there are, but it ebbs and flows. It's never consistent. So you can't say, I do 2 a week. That's not how it works. Mm-hmm. So around the time when my op-ed came out, there was a huge flurry of interest. Mm-hmm. Around the time when the book She Said came out, there was another flurry of interest. When the movie came out, when any of Harvey's criminal trials, there's a verdict or anything, those moments can be like 10, 20, I think my record was 20 interviews in a day.
Oh my God.
But of course, there are times in the Me Too movement when weeks and months pass and things seem really quiet. Mm-hmm. Maybe only 1 or 2 people have contacted me, over the course of a month. So there are definitely fallow periods, and there are more, periods when this story is much more in the public eye. Yeah. But regardless of whether the story is in the public eye or not in the public eye, I think it is contingent upon us to continue to do that hard work that goes on in the background of making legal and policy changes, of supporting other survivors, of making sure that nonprofits that work in this space are, adequately supported. That there are a whole number of things that we as a community of survivors need to do to keep the momentum going on where it really matters. And so when lots of people say to me, but the Me Too movement's no longer as much in the public eye, I'm like, public eye, smubbic eye, it doesn't, whether or not it offers you a platform, yes, and that's a benefit. But actually the real work and the traction that we achieve making the legal and policy changes, that work is unsexy. That happens in back rooms. That happens without it being on the front page of newspapers. But it's equally important work, if not more important work than raising awareness in the media, is making real change in law and policy that will impact survivors when they come forward with their stories, and hopefully before they have to come forward with a story.
Yeah, I agree. And I have 2 thoughts, Rowena. One is, though, I want to go back to one thing about all these random interviews and this ebbing and flowing. Because another thing I've been thinking about myself, because, same with me, like, okay, they'll need somebody to talk as a representative on Fox News about, like, another famous person's accused. So all of a sudden they have us all on speed dial. It's like, who gets to them the fastest gets the interview spot for 30 seconds. But I think that I try not to see it this way, and it doesn't sound like you see it that way, but it feels a little out of our control, like another part of our life over which we have no control. So I tend to say, okay, I can either think of that as like, oh, that's another trigger, but I don't, it doesn't seem like you do. I say, okay, let's go, let's try it again. And then and I like where you landed. We need to do the things that will in the long term matter and stick, and absolutely stick. And I get worried with like all the stuff that's unstuck right now. Like the politics are changing so dramatically, but maybe we can get more things to stick. And I know Me Too and your work has done globally too, but maybe we wrap up with, I don't know that you knew this, but we at Take Back the Night started the National Sexual Assault Legal Hotline that's free. And we're doing really well with it. More and more people are learning about it. So we're doing a way for every survivor, much like RAIN's hotline for counseling support. This is free legal access to, tell us where what the basics, and some trauma-informed lawyer will absolutely try and help. So at least I feel like that's one resource, actually changing the laws and the statutes and overturning the NDAs and all the other work. I guess what's next besides what you're personally doing with your story? What would your calls to action be for our listeners who say, like, what else can I do to help? What else what else do you want to land on here toward the end?
I'm involved with a lot of different nonprofits that advocate in their specific space. So there are nonprofits that work on, banning NDAs as a tool to cover sexual assault and or any other form of crime. There are NDAs that work on supporting those that feel voiceless for one reason or another. I've been connected with an organization called Valor US that supports mainly janitors and fruit pickers of a Hispanic background. And that's a very specific form of, reaching people who feel at risk of sexual assault in the workplace. So, that's just one example of a number of nonprofits I work with. So I think there is always work to be done, and there are specifically nonprofits that work in areas that I care about, that I want to volunteer time and energy towards. As you mentioned, I'm working on all of these personal creative projects myself, my memoir, my novel, my screenplay. I also, I connect one-on-one with survivors to try to offer them informal advice on either their legal cases or how to navigate policy, or even really just, emotional support. So that is a thing that I find very worthwhile, but takes up a lot of time, of course. I'm thinking about moving that into a sort of more cohort format so that we can set up support groups, survivor support groups among ourselves, so that we can start to build community. So these are all sorts of grassroots ways in which any survivor, that it doesn't have to be a high profile Weinstein survivor, could be a survivor of any form of abuse, can get involved with. And I think that these grassroots efforts are deeply important at a time when federally funding is being cut for sexual assault survivorship support, and funding in general for nonprofits has been cut. So I think, we can all contribute in this way to the Me Too movement. It doesn't have to be being a source for the New York Times. It doesn't have to be walking the red carpet with Universal Studios and their production of She Said. It can also be some of these low-key, largely invisible efforts to really, that whole idea about the boy on the beach who threw back one crab out of thousands, and his parent who said to him, you can't save them all, but I saved that one. So that idea of, in sexual assault survivorship, if you are reaching out and you are connecting with one other survivor and helping that one other survivor, then you are working for the Me Too movement and you are doing good in the world. People always ask me, what can I do? As I'm a regular person, I have no media influence, what can I do? And I always say, believe survivors. We started this podcast with you telling me a story of how much you weren't believed when you were a young woman. And I think that if anyone ever comes to you, not you, but you, the listener, the idea that you can believe them and offer them some support goes much further than you might think. We still live in a world where survivors on the whole are not believed. And so you can make a difference by simply believing that person, telling them, I believe you, it wasn't your fault. How can I support you? I think these are 3 of the most important lines anyone can ever say to a survivor.
I love it. Thank you so much, Rowena. That was beautiful. I mean, I feel like you speak in such eloquent and yet it's so accessible and visual. I can't wait to read the memoir. I'm sure you write and speak the same. So thank you for spending some time talking with me and sharing so many important ideas about the healing journey you took, the struggles you faced, and how you triumphed and are continuing to do so and make such a tremendous impact in the world. So Thank you, and I'm honored. And for all of our listeners, please continue journal as you listen to each episode. I'm sure I find something so hopeful from every single person we host, and it's such a grateful. It's actually it's more than just our journey as survivors. It's really a journey for hope and healing for so many who have been hurt and marginalized in the world. So thank you. And I hope you'll continue to stay well until the next episode drops. And until then, together we are thriving and surviving. Take care.
Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Dear Katie. These conversations are never easy, but they're always necessary. And we're so grateful you chose to share this space with us. If something in today's episode stirred something within you, please give yourself what you need. Whether that's rest, support, or just a deep breath, you're not alone. To hear more stories, resources, and survivor-centered conversations, be sure to subscribe and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. We want to hear from you, so please leave us a review and share your feedback. Your thoughts help us create episodes that resonate with listeners. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.